Bam. Okay, so here we are. So, welcome everyone joining us today here on Zoom with us to the Opera Queens podcast, and those hopefully who'll be watching in the future as well too. And yes, so this is our Opera Queens podcast, and I'm Mike Van. I'm the artistic director of Opera Queens, and it's a company that presents opera in drag, genderbent, and queerified. I use they pronouns, and my name is Fan Ming in Chinese. And I'm super excited to have with us today the wonderful Steven Sérpa, who is an American composer and also, once upon a time, has also been a countertenor. So before we exactly, well, there's lots to talk about. And so before I welcome the wonderful Steven who you see here, I'm going to embarrass him by playing a clip and reading his bio and all of that. Before we do that, I just want to do a land acknowledgement as well, which is very important, and want to acknowledge that I'm joining everyone from Toronto, also known as Takaranto, and it's the land where the trees stand in the water, and I live by the Toronto harbourfront, so it's something that I see every day, fortunately, which I'm very grateful for. And it's a land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and I'm very grateful to live, work, create on this land. And although you may not be here with us, I know that Steven is joining us from Texas. I really encourage you to get in touch with the land that you're on and to know whose land that you live on, if it's unceded, especially in North America. And a site that I love is native-land.ca, and it actually does have some US locales as well too, which is great for those who are American. So thank you for joining us from whichever land you have been on and are on, and we're really grateful, especially as an opera company that is really pioneering IBPOC, BIPOC performers, composers, creators, that we really want to take that time to acknowledge that. So now the time of great embarrassment, I hope. No, I'm kidding. Always great to have some self-love for the amazing work that you've done and all of that. I haven't checked if there's an update, so if there are any updates, I'm sure we'll be able to talk about them today. And I just have this so you can see a little bit and have a little bit of a visual aid for those who like it. So the very esteemed Steven Sérpa is an award-winning composer of opera, choral, symphonic, and chamber music. His Invocation was premiered by the Austin Symphony Orchestra and has since been taken up by ensembles such as the Glimmer Glass Opera Orchestra, the Tree Falls New Music, and the Chamber Orchestra of the Triangle. Critics praised his one-act opera, Thyrsis and Amaranth, as truly beautiful, magnificent little story gemmed full of thought and feeling and meaning, with gorgeous music and wrenching lyrics. It was premiered by Hartford Opera Theatre and has had over a dozen productions throughout the US and Canada. Steven has recently collaborated on solo vocal works with singers from Austin Opera. These include a song cycle with Mexican poet Cecilia Castillo, Canciones de Desamor, another on the poetry of Jeffrey Beam called The Creatures, a bestiary retold, and a Merritt's Rights cantata based on the writing of Mildred Loving titled And Loving for All. Recent commissions include works for the Pale Blue Dot, Hartford Independent Chamber Orchestra, and the Sterling Trio. His new oratorio, James Book of Ruth, which I had the great pleasure of seeing when it premiered online this year, tackled the subject of HIV stigma and was recently premiered by Inversion Ensemble in Austin, Texas. His new one-act opera, These Wings Are Meant to Fly, responding to the Pulse nightclub shooting, was premiered by Thompson Street Opera in Chicago, and productions will be mounted in Montreal, Hartford, and Austin next season. Actually, we'll talk about that later, but it has premiered actually in Canada, which is very exciting. Steven has studied with composers Tom Capillo, or Cipullo, actually is Italian, Dan Velcher, and Evgeny Charlat, recently earning his doctorate in composition from the University of Texas at Austin. And he makes his home in Austin, Texas, and works as co-director of Fast Forward Austin, producing innovative, forward-looking music experiences for local audiences and communities. So we're super excited to have Steven here. And actually, one of the reason why we're here, we've sort of alluded to, but Steven's opera, These Wings Are Meant to Fly, is a piece that we produced with Opera Queens. We did a live version in Montreal recently in September, and in October we filmed a version, and both outings and the film version is being edited will be released sometime in the future once we've gotten it all together and organized and edited. And joining us in our Zoom audience, actually, I won't put him on the spot now, but is the amazing César Aguilar, who's joining us, and yeah, did a really incredible job with our rehearsals, with our performances. And now that I've embarrassed Steven, I will also yay César, I will also embarrass César because I don't know if he knows, but I will have a clip I'm going to show of the performance that we did in Montreal, which was really, really special. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to pull this up for everyone to see. We're going to watch the first few minutes, and I'm just going to share my audio as well to make sure that this is okay. It should be working. And so this was at a beautiful venue called Can Experience in Montreal. Super excited to have a live audience to watch it as things opened up in Montreal earlier, and it's with pianist Morgan-Paige Melbourne. And there's something which is very cool called a text message chorus, which we did in a little bit of a reduced capacity that I had the pleasure to be in with Rain. And but we'll talk all about that later. There's a lot to discuss with this very fascinating piece. But I'm gonna play this, and just give me a thumbs up once it starts, just to let me know it's working, and hopefully it will stay that way.
I just want my cousin back.
Solo quiero mi primo regrese.
Solo quiero mi primo
Si
regrese.
pudiera abrazarlo una vez más.
Well, I know myself, I could listen to this all day. It's so gorgeous.
Yay.
But just a little bit of a teaser. So I hope you're excited as I am to welcome the wonderful Steven. Hello, Steven.
Hi, everyone.
Really, really exciting to speak with you and to talk about this piece. And so, if you didn't know already, I'm recording this so that we can post it on our website, operaqueens.ca/podcast. After we have episode 1 up with Rain, who's a countertenor, and uh, and we'll have today's up, which is the second episode. And we're also really excited and want to acknowledge that Canada Council for the Arts, Conseil des Arts du Canada, is supporting this podcast and the Opera Queens activities this year, which is super wonderful. And that this podcast is to really explore queerness, especially BIPOC queerness, which is something that we've really been wanting to see in our communities in classical music and beyond. And so we're really excited to talk about it, especially with Steven, who's a really amazing ambassador and teller of queer stories, facilitator of queer stories. So it's great to see you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. The weather here in Austin is beautiful. It's 70 degrees, and so I decided to sit on the porch. So, hi. Sorry it's so cold in Canada.
Yeah, no, we were just talking before we let everyone in that it just snowed yesterday, a lot of snow, so there's a lot of snow on the ground. I'm not going to show that. We in Canada will be seeing a lot more of it and have seen a lot of it. So we are all living vicariously through you. And so we're going to talk for about 5 minutes to an hour, and then afterwards we're going to stop the recording and have a little Zoom after party and take any questions anyone has. And if you have any along the way, feel free to put them in the chat, and otherwise we'll look forward to talk to everyone after. So it's great to see you today. It's great to see what a lovely background you have, a real live background, unlike the Zoom background I have, which is you get to see our branding, but you don't get to see the truth. So I have some secrets hidden.
I'm also outside because I didn't want to clean up.
Exactly, the benefits of the Zoom world, right?
Yeah.
So it's great to see you and great to speak with you. We had the great pleasure of rehearsing your music and working on it. It was all virtual, which was something very new, and something I was realizing is that I didn't actually really get to really spend much time with you or get to meet with you. We worked sort of with rehearsals over Zoom and things like that, but it was a little different because everyone else with the Opera Queens I've met or we've known each other before we met to work on things this year. So this is a really cool opportunity also for me to learn more about you and your process and all that wonderful stuff. So I would love to, because we just saw it, to start with These Wings. So These Wings Are Meant to Fly talks about partner loss, talks about the Pulse Orlando tragedy of 2016 in the States, and of course is a really beautiful telling of a queer story. So I would love to ask you just about this piece, about how it came into existence, and to introduce us to the behind-the-scenes world of how These Wings sort of was born.
Well, These Wings Were Meant to Fly came about as a collaboration with Sérpa Kline. He's a playwright in New York, and was the first piece that I read by him. And I'm really drawn to stories told in sort of micro-dope story, a short drama. Maybe it's like modern attention span. I'd rather I just love that concentrated emotion short story, and this short play was exactly that. But I was looking for a librettist for a larger story, oratorio, that would end up being James' Book of Ruth. And so this short play was among the material that Zach had sent me. And I was immediately just struck by it. It was just a really powerful play. And his writing style, he writes in I guess prose. I'm not drawn to rhyming types of texts. He writes in prose, but it doesn't designate characters and it doesn't designate anything to a director. In fact, this short play was his his designation for a director was for any number of players. So a director has like complete creative control over something like this. And I thought that was an exciting puzzle. Like, how would I, as a composer, work with something like that? And ultimately, we ended up writing James' Book of Ruth over the course of a few years. And again, he sent me a libretto that did not have characters. It did not have aria designations or choruses separated. So it was a lot of playing and a lot of freedom that I was given as a composer. So that's how I came to These Wings Are Meant to Fly. I composed it directly after composing the oratorio. I just felt,
wow.
Yeah. It felt like a continuation of the oratorio, not necessarily the storyline, but sort of my musical language and working with his text. Sorry, one of the dogs is barking in the background, so don't mind him. That's Ed. He's our new foster dog we've had for a couple months, so he's about to go to a vet appointment. But so working with Zach's text was, after reading the short play, I was like, this is a micro opera. This is a scene that I need to set. And in between that, I had to write the oratorio. So I got around to writing this in 2019. And it was sort of a continuation of the puzzle of working with Zach's plays and librettos. A lot of freedom, a lot of trust, a lot of back and forth between he and I went into composing it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
It's interesting because for me, at least, and a lot of the Opera Queens, we got to know These Wings first, and then the premiere of Book of Ruth happened later. So it's really interesting because sometimes with composition, it doesn't always come in the kind of performative aspect in chronological order. So it's really interesting because then you had worked more with a bigger chunk of work with Zach Kline's and went into a smaller one version after, rather than the other way around, which is interesting. And speaking
right,
with, go ahead.
You would think I would do like a shorter study piece with his work and write this short opera and then the bigger one, but yeah, it worked out the other way around.
Yeah, really starting going big.
Yeah.
And well, speaking of which, I do have a clip of Book of Ruth, which we'll end our interview for, which is great. Thank you for sending that to me. And so you will get to see it later if you don't know this amazing work. But do you want to talk a little bit of that? Because I think obviously then also being with Zach Kline's writing, it's probably good to talk a little bit about this work and how it came to be. And it's quite a big undertaking too. So it's quite an amazing piece.
Yeah, it's a 70-minute oratorio with chorus and soloists and instrumental ensemble. It was commissioned by a choral group, and then those plans fell apart. And then a group here in Austin decided to, like, they were super excited about the story and about the work itself. They're called Inversion Ensemble. You'll see them in the video at the end. They are a local ensemble who have focused exclusively on new music, on living composers, and are actively seeking out BIPOC composers and queer composers to bring more of that into the world, which I absolutely love. And I've benefited because they did my oratorio. so yeah, it was a bit of a bummer when that commission project fell through because I had already written the piano vocal score.
And it's not a small thing.
Not a small thing at all. Right. And Zach and I had spent a year and a half working out the libretto and the story. So when things fall apart like that, it feels like just a whole waste of time, or like waste of creative energy. And so it was just absolutely wonderful that Inversion Ensemble stepped in. So yeah, that story, I guess I'm sort of drawn creatively to tragedy, which...
Yeah, we talked about this before.
Yeah. which is sort of, I don't know how to feel about that. I'll need to talk to my therapist a little more. But um, but yeah, I think that there are a lot of, there's the core trope in cinema and in plays and in operas of like the queer person as a tragedy, but really in real life, it's queer people have a lot of tragedy like visited on us by outside forces. And I think in these two works, it just really highlighted the external forces, like the Pulse nightclub shooting was a tragedy visited on queer people and on the Latin community in Orlando. And with James' Book of Ruth, it's about HIV and the stigma surrounding it, but also the systems that surround it. On one hand, we have all the like medical advancements that make HIV a manageable disease, that someone can reach undetectable status and live a long and healthy normal life for all intents and purposes. But then on the other hand, we have the lack of access to all of this medical advancement, particularly in the United States, where we don't have a healthcare system. And so we have a lot of communities of color that and indigenous people that don't have access to anything. And there's even more stigma in communities of color regarding queerness, regarding gay men and men who have sex with men. And it perpetuates this a desire not to get tested, to not know your status, a fear that your communities will reject you if you know these things. So James' Book of Ruth really explored quite a bit of that in Zach's poetic text, but like those were the systems that are playing this tragedy out, that are visited upon queer people in real life.
Exactly. Yeah, really, really well said. And definitely Through These Wings too is another story that really tells an important story, and it's really important to talk about that and to visit that in these works, and when it's done well, of course, it's really beautiful to see. And it's something that, obviously you found the right genre, because it really allows us to really go there in a great way. Makes for great opera, for example, or oratorio, really. And I mean, you've already alluded to this. I think we all know the importance of telling queer stories and telling BIPOC stories. It's something that we see in lots of different genres. But for you and your journey as a creator, as a composer, what's the importance of telling those queer stories? And is this something you always wanted to do, or it's something that came more just through these works? Wondering if you can talk a little bit about that in your compositional work.
This will get pretty complicated. I did not have the typical narrative of a composer, I guess, if there is a typical narrative.
Right.
So my path started in adulthood. I grew up in poverty, in a family full of domestic violence and drug abuse by my father, and ultimately divorce and a single mother. So we had no money we didn't have money for shoes and milk. So there were no music lessons, and I always wanted to do music. I remember in middle school and junior high, where I wanted to join the marching band, because all my friends, we were all in the gifted classes and the accelerated AP type classes, and everyone was doing music lessons, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to play clarinet, but I wasn't able to, for a number of reasons, money being the biggest obstacle for all of that. So it wasn't until I was 20 years old that I had my first voice lesson and decided to take music theory lessons, because I wanted to learn what the heck this music thing was that I was so moved by. So I didn't start until adulthood. Um, and I started as a vocalist, and I think part of that is sort of the remnants of poverty, being that the voice is the free instrument. It's something that
Right.
I could have
For
been
better or for
doing,
worse.
right, for better or worse. You're stuck with what you've got. It doesn't cost you anything, except, I mean, you probably need a good ear, nose, and throat doctor, someone that you trust.
Yeah, yeah.
But so I started with voice lessons, and I loved it, and I had some really wonderful, supportive teachers. And then I started undergrad as a music major, and I had some really exciting music theory classes in which we had to write an art song. We had to write like a range of quartet type thing in order to learn like orchestration and some basic score kind of placements and things like that. And I found that I loved the creative aspect of it. And I loved it more than being a singer. I hated auditioning. I hated I still hate practicing. I absolutely like learning repertoire is fine, but I always get distracted. I want to create from the piece in front of me or whatever. Like, so playing around with like, let's say like Strozzi bass lines and vocal lines, it's like I would always create something in the middle. But I stuck with the singing thing for a bit, and then I came to composition after I got my master's in early music performance. I switched into composition.
Right.
So probably a good 10 years after. So probably around my 30th birthday, I started composing. So yeah, that's how I got to the composing place. But all of it also coincided with me coming out and me becoming, and me finding my voice as a countertenor coincided with me coming out as a queer man. And just I was able to question everything that I was told. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family, and so there's a lot of dogma surrounding gender and surrounding sexuality, and a lot of shame around all of that. And so becoming a countertenor, you're able to question even the classical music systems that you're placed in. You're outside of the established Fox system. So you're kind of making your own rules, and that's super exciting. That was super exciting and super creative as a vocalist. And so I feel like it was just a natural stretch to start making my own rules as a composer, and wanting to tell the stories that I wanted to see on stage and see in the orchestra. It was yeah. So that's how I came about to being a composer.
Very interesting journey, and yeah, really, it's really beautiful that everything kind of coincided. And I also want to thank you for your vulnerability and your openness to share that. And obviously, being something recorded that we want people to be here to see and to watch later, it's really very vulnerable for you, but it's also really, really wonderful, because I think people, this is important, the importance of telling stories and telling our stories, and why I really wanted this podcast to exist, because as queer people, as BIPOC people, we've gone through a lot often. There's a lot of challenges, a lot of really wonderful things, but it's really important for people to hear it, because growing up, for example, I didn't really hear a lot of this. I didn't have a lot of role models. I didn't have a lot of people speaking openly about it, and I think it's very healing for people to hear. It's very important for people to hear that, and it's a big gift for you to be here today to share that and to be so open with that, because of course it was not easy. Fortunately, now you're finding great success with both your composition and your specifically queer composition, but it's quite a journey. And even for myself, hearing it, I see so many parallels. You know, growing up with immigrants that didn't have a lot of money, and and also kind of I had done pre-med before finding my voice literally too, and came out relatively late where it was kind of very parallel to my journey as a musician. Fortunately, so far at least, I like the singing enough and the process of being a singer enough to keep it going. But yeah, it's really cool to hear that. I'm sure others here today with us and also watching will also resonate with that, and hopefully find the courage and the hope, the inspiration to keep going, because it's not easy, but it can be really worth it. And oftentimes, looking back, a lot of those doors closed or were difficult for a reason, because we were meant to go in a different direction and to continue finding the authenticity. So it's a really beautiful story, and I love hearing that. I love that you shared that, and it's really wonderful. And I think it also informs who you are, because our process working with you, we always found that you were someone with such empathy and such compassion, and I think often having a little bit more perspective on life gives us that. So it's very evident in the way even that we've been working with you, that we found that. So thank you for sharing that, and really interesting to hear your journey. And fortunately, these days, going very well. So worth that crazy journey.
Yep.
So I would love to know also, you had mentioned Sérpa Kline, who wrote the text for these wings that we worked on, and also for Book of Ruth, and really wonderful text, and has obviously created some fruitful collaborations with you. So how did you get to know Zach and his work, and do you think this is someone that you want to continue collaborating with, and what is this whole process of collaboration being like? Because with the music and the text, it's so interwoven in vocal music, and would just love to know more about this collaboration, how it all began.
I would love to continue working with Zach. He and I are both looking for opportunities to create again. And now that I've done 2 works with him, he's a very generous collaborator. I think the best way is to describe like certain instances, and let's start with These Wings Are Meant to Fly. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just like sort of a giant block of text, like no characters or anything. So there were texts that were like told that felt very much from an outside entity, and then there were lines that felt like they were told from one person. And so that's what this opera ended up being, the outside chorus and then the soloist. And Zach didn't name anyone, so I didn't want to create a name. And I think that leaving the soloist unnamed creates a question, and maybe even a universality. At least it felt like that to me. But also it sort of erases identity, which is a danger that we have when it comes to these sorts of tragedies anyway. And so I thought that leaving it unnamed would bring attention to that. Like, why is it unnamed? So there are different layers, but so the whole text message chorus was completely me.
Cool. Interesting.
It's such a weird thing. I was like, hey Zach, what do you think of this? And then translating those texts into Spanish, I wanted to connect it even more to the Latin community that was affected. And when I read his play, I had just finished writing my Canciones de Desamor with Celia Castillo, with her poetry, and I love the Spanish language, and I wish I spoke. So I'm in Texas. Maybe I should just start taking lessons, because I can practice like basically anywhere around Austin, like all the time.
Exactly.
So Zach is basically game for anything that I want to suggest, and if it doesn't work, then we revisit it and change things. It's that kind of a relationship that we have. Also, in These Wings, I cut out a whole section in the middle, and I felt like it stopped the story, it stopped the drama, and then I finished the piece and it was missing something, and so I put the text back in.
Oh.
It was it's the whole section in the middle
Yeah.
where the soloist sings, "I shower, I want to
Right.
eradicate your scent from my body." That whole section, like I
Oh,
just cut it out. I was
wow.
like, no, this doesn't work for me. And then after I finished the piece,
Right.
I was like, no, I was wrong. I
Right.
so I love the fact that Zach and I can both create, as me as a musician and him as the librettist, and acknowledge that we make a misstep or something. We just have that kind of a relationship. So I was like, yeah, I was totally wrong, you were right, this needs to be in there. But the fact that he trusted me and said, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, cut it, it gave me the freedom to learn what would work and what wouldn't. So anyway, it ended up being the whole play and not my edited section.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, when it in James' book of Ruth, I was constantly texting him in the middle of the night, and he was in New York and I was in Austin, so
Right.
the poor guy ended up getting texts like at like, I don't know, like 2 a.m. his time or
Yeah.
something. So yeah,
And so, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
nope, that was it.
Yeah, well, and so obviously in the pandemic, we've been working a lot at a distance, but have you all always been working at a distance anyhow, even before the pandemic began?
With him, he's in New York and I'm in Austin, so um
Wow.
while we were writing while he was writing the oratorio libretto, and I was very hands-on with that, which I think he appreciated. Of course, you'd have to ask him. Maybe he wasn't so appreciative, but yeah, I met with him a couple times up in New York
Right.
because I have friends up there, and I would go up to see in
Always
Brooklyn.
a great excuse to go to
Right,
like a
exactly.
yeah.
And I grew up in Rhode Island, so going
Okay.
up there, up to New England all the time, and I would pop over to New York probably 2 or 3 times over the course of writing the oratorio. It was in person, but most of it was emails and text messages and Zoom meetings. Before the pandemic, we were Zooming.
Right.
So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I had one coach I was working on with Zoom before the pandemic too, very, very ahead of the time. But we were already in this digital age, so it really allowed a lot of cool things to happen at a distance, which is amazing and less costly. Um,
And these wings meant to fly, I finished it in 2019, that summer, and I I had never really used aleatory before, and
right.
so I like using the aleatoric text messages as the chorus
Yeah.
was something new to me, but it ended up really working as a pandemic kind of Zoom thing. I think
Mm,
it would have been
oppression.
so much harder if I had written like straight up polyphony with
Oh my
these
goodness. Yes.
with the choruses. Like that would have just been such a difficult process to put together through Zoom rehearsals and through Zoom recordings and things like that. I mean, people would have done it, but
Yeah.
um it seemed timely that I had experimented with this.
Yeah, definitely. It was a really cool process working on it, and for myself, having been mostly on the text messages part of it, firsthand. With we had 5 of us for the filming process, where we had done the audio for that separately, and César ended up filming the soloist part in Toronto. Just how things worked out, and it's really interesting. We still have yet to put all of it together to see how it will all fit, but it makes it possible to do it in different ways. And in our concert performance, we didn't have the whole chorus with us, so you were so generous to create a solo version, which we ended up kind of doing a hybrid where we sort of incorporate a little bit of the chorus in. But yeah, we're all really hoping to do it one day again with everybody. But even so, it's allowed for different possibilities of how it's done. Some of the other productions did it totally at a distance, and it's really fascinating. Aleatory is really cool, where every time you do it, it's a little bit different. Each take we did was slightly different, and I know for me, like experiencing it and listening to it, it really captures this kind of like swirling text message aspect, which is very much, I think, a lot of us, particularly in the pandemic, when we're so much at home dealing with technology and social media and messages, I think there's a lot of message overwhelm, and even just that aspect itself is so interesting. The way you tackled it and how it comes across, it was really, really well done. And I hadn't even thought of that, but thinking of it like in a polyphonic way, it would be very different and wouldn't really capture that in the same kind of way. It, might be a little too formal, but it would have been interesting to have that version of it. But in the end, I think what you created was really interesting, and the fact that you had the text message tones, which we put in to our performance, and which we're going to put into our video as well too. It's cool having that extra instrument in a way. It's very eerie sometimes too, just hearing it, because I think a lot of us are at home sometimes and you hear a ding down the hallway and you're like, who's that? What's that? It's really interesting, not only with obviously the situations about Pulse and Latinx community, but the whole, which is something I didn't know until I discovered the piece later, this whole aspect of dealing with technology, and then for all of us being stuck in a pandemic, being so reliant on it, really opened so many interesting conversations and ideas through the piece. Yeah, very, 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 very cool. And yeah, great to hear about your collaboration with Zach too, which already was at a distance. And I guess speaking of which, so These Wings, which we ended up producing this year with Opéra Queens, and also Book of Ruth ended up both, and also with other previous, really all of the different productions of These Wings ended up being created at a distance. A lot of it was during the pandemic. So could you talk a little bit about your experience preparing these productions in a way that is not kind of typical, where you're maybe in the room or there's everybody together, and in different, because there's been so many different ways that these productions have happened during the pandemic, kind of like live or hybrid or only virtual, and this whole pandemic experience as a composer.
Mhm. Well, as a composer, I am pretty hands-off once I've written my piece. Unless, how do I say this? The score itself is how we composers communicate. And I'm always learning how to best communicate my ideas. So looking at a score like 10 years ago, I'm like, ew, why did I write that way? Because I've just learned to communicate better. Communicate in a way that doesn't need me to constantly interrupt a rehearsal or something. So, but it's also, I've always trusted the creativity and the voices of whoever I collaborate with. I subscribe very much to Ned Rorum's idea that once you've written the piece and it's on the page, it's not yours anymore. It is whoever is going to interpret it. And you hear so many different interpretations of like Ned Rorum songs or something super common, or opera arias that you are doing, like whether it's Dido's Lament or whatever. There are so many different interpretations, and I, as a composer, see the validity of an interpretation and want to encourage that. Unless something is absolutely wrong, then I will open up my mouth and try to help.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm pretty hands off. So the pandemic hasn't changed how I collaborate with ensembles. And I was not involved in the Chicago production of These Wings. They did it all themselves, so I only saw the final product after the fact. These Wings was just done as a in-person performance in Hartford a couple weeks ago. And
Amazing. Wow, I didn't know that. It's exciting.
yep, well, it just happened. So yeah.
Oh.
They weren't sure that it was going to happen, depending on how the surges go. So but it happened in person, which was great, and I was there in the room for rehearsals and things, but I didn't really need to open my mouth for anything, really. I think maybe one thing, but yeah, I'm a hands-off kind of person. I think that music can be a dictatorship, and sometimes that's necessary and sometimes it's not. And I don't think that the composer needs to be a crazy dictator when it comes to their music. That just makes the music making unpleasant for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and speaking so much, especially about telling queer stories, and with those in the BIPOC community, Latinx, for example, it's we deal with a lot of oppression, a lot of kind of censoring of our authenticity, anyways. So this is the kind of place where we really want to create that space where, especially in classical music, where there's a lot of confines and hierarchy, to kind of have a space where people feel more able to be themselves. And so, yeah, we're really happy that we discovered your work and got to collaborate with you, because we really found this kind of openness, and this it was very, yeah, it was a real gift, because performing living work is really exciting, but sometimes, depending on who it is, some people are, very very much the micromanaging type, and of
Yeah.
course they're it's important to get the work in a way that honors the composer, but it's also really wonderful to have someone that's open to possibilities that maybe they didn't even realize when they first, put the pen to paper or typed it or whatever, however it was
Right.
notated. Yeah. Yeah, really wonderful. And we try to involve you as much as we can too, because it's always interesting to hear your perspective. And hopefully, we try to find a balance where we're not like every note, like, what did you mean? But also at the same time, wanting to include you, because I think it's great to be able to have that kind of interaction and that flow. And there were a lot of really great moments where you just had a note to give César or Morgan or me or someone, and it was really helpful to have that insight. And at the same time, I know that you said it was kind of interesting to see, kind of like a skill testing question, like how well did my intentions, my writing, communicate that, as you said, because it's all communication, right? So
Right. Yep.
yeah, but it's really interesting, and it's great to see all these interpretations and how they take the work and how it kind of grows and changes and lives in space, which is really really interesting. Yeah, definitely. Um, Fantastic. So I think actually, why don't we move to another clip of Book of Ruth? And actually, before that, I'm just going to show a picture, which I'm glad I remembered, from our film production. I don't think actually I showed this to Steven, but we had a really interesting idea, that Steven was saying that, because that's Jay, a wonderful Jay, who is part of our text message course as well too. This is a beautiful picture of César, who's joining us in drag, performing these wings with Morgan at the piano, and this was at Array Music in Toronto. And so, yeah, we had an interesting idea where kind of Stephen knew the work we're doing. Not everything we're doing is in drag necessarily, because it's also, gender bending or queerified. Although some people do always ask me, like, why are only you in drag, or why are only some of you in drag? So it's like, well, it's one way of telling the story, but we don't want to limit ourselves just to drag. But you had this idea actually to have the soloist in drag, and to take their makeup off, and I thought it was really super evocative. So we worked with that idea in our Toronto production for a little bit of a different take on it. So yeah, so it was a really cool idea and a really different kind of way to envision it.
I actually thought that it was a different singer because I hadn't seen César in drag.
Wow! Oh, neither have
And
I.
so
Yeah, yeah.
once the singing once the vocal line
Hey,
started, I was like, oh, it's César. What? It
what a
was exciting.
transformation, eh?
Yeah. But I mean, haven't we all been to like a billion drag fundraisers and
Right.
maybe not memorial services, hopefully, but like having an event hosted by a drag queen is so common in our communities. I
Mhm.
just felt like that was a different sort of connection that could be possible.
Yeah. So it was very cool to be able to do it in that way, and for that idea, which really I think added so much to the piece and was able to present it in a different way. And yeah, it was really cool, especially having experienced César performing it in his male presenting self. And César is here today, but I don't want to put him on the spot. And also, we will have a podcast episode in the future where we will feature César, and I think it'll be super interesting to hear from him then, because he was here today to kind of hear some of your insights, and it was a big part of creating this piece with us. So we will be able to check in with him in the future, which is very exciting. So let me turn it over to a clip from Book of Ruth. And this is Ruth's Aria, and it is I Will Give Him Rest, which is really gorgeous. And yeah, as we said, a 70-minute work, so there's so much happening in this piece, but this is a really beautiful moment, and so I just wanted to share this with us, and then we'll head back and close off the interview portion, how the time flies. So again, please scream at me if this is not working, and again, this is with Inversion Ensemble, and voila. I'm just going to double check that I'm sharing my audio again. Yes.
Put him in the ground, can I have your spade? I will take the dead from you. I will put him in the ground, can I have your spade? You know you're lost, let me take the spade from you. I work alone, I walk alone. Is there
So beautiful, such a yeah, beautiful palette you evoke, and there's so many moments where it's evoking so many different styles, but yeah, incredible piece. I'm sure we could talk another hour just about Book of Ruth because it is so monumental, but so exciting to see, especially in our classical music community, in our queer community, to see this beautiful story being told in such a beautiful way. So I just wanted to close our interview portion, and this is the question that I guess I'm planning to ask everybody. It's kind of the drag race question where, we talked a little bit about, your journey as a composer and everything, but if you could tell something to your younger self, especially in a difficult moment with some perspective, what would you say?
I would say, and this is playing on some of the difficult childhood that I lived. There was difficult story. Let me share. When I was 6 or 7-ish, I remember my parents fighting in their bedroom, and I wasn't sure if my father was hitting my mother or if he punched the wall again or whatever. But I knew that if my mother was in danger, he told me to call the police. So 6-year-old, 7-year-old me climbs up on the counter and makes that phone call. And in that moment, I felt like I was betraying my father and betraying my family unit, but also protecting my mother. It's a lot of responsibility on a child. And in that moment, I just remember very vividly shrinking and hiding in the corner on top of the cabinet, in the corner next to the sink where we had the rotary telephone. It's all just, in that moment, I shrank myself. And there are so many instances from childhood onward where I would just hide. And I felt like all the weight of responsibility and all the weight of betrayal meant that I had nothing to contribute, and or that I shouldn't contribute. I didn't deserve to contribute. And so I would tell my childhood self who lived that moment that I do have something to contribute to the world, and that I should not stay silent and I should not hide myself. So I spent many, many years hiding myself and fitting people's ideas of fitting their narratives of what I was supposed to be. And it wasn't really until probably my late 20s, after really spending a lot of time with my art as a vocalist and as a creator, that I started to that I needed to start saying my own stories. And that's really what led to being a composer too. Getting not to hide, not to be part of someone else's narrative, but to share my own. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Really, really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story again from a very intimate part of yourself, but it's something I think everybody needs to hear. And I'm sure someone, and I've experienced this with certain interviews I've done where someone said, you know, they've watched it and in that moment that is something they needed to hear. So I'm really glad that you were able to share that, and glad that you were able to come out on the other side to see what that value and see what that contribution was, because absolutely we're all here, especially who know your work, that see the incredible value and the healing that it brings, and it makes those moments worth it, because you've worked so hard to find what it was and then to share it, to continue to share it. So we're all super grateful that you are, and that you are continuing to do that, and that you're here today to express that side of yourself, which the music of course tells a story, but of course hearing it from your mouth and your own words as well shows a different side of you that we don't always get to see as Steven Sérpa, the composer. So wow, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, for me it really resonated, that aspect of, you know, of not staying hidden, and of really finding that, you know, strength and courage to share and to find that outlet. So beautiful way to kind of tie everything we've talked together today about. Really beautiful getting to speak with you today, to hear about your journey, and that you express it with such positivity and compassion now, which is really, really inspiring. And yeah, to hear your work and to share your work with others, and to get everyone as excited as we are about your work. And yeah, really grateful to have Steven today here with our Opera Queens podcast, and to share his beautiful work with us today. And we will be saving this recording and posting it on our YouTube channel, and we'll put it on our website, operaqueens.ca/podcast, if you wanted to rewatch it or share it with someone that needed to hear what we talked about today. And really invite you to spread the word, so that we can continue to not only tell the queer stories, but have those stories heard by people that need to hear it, and who didn't think they needed to hear it, but needed to hear it too, which is also important. And we're still working out the specifics, but so far our episode 3 will feature the wonderful J. Marchand Knight, who I accidentally shared earlier. And of course, when I go to share their picture, it goes to César's picture. But here is a beautiful Jay, who we will be talking to December 23rd, at least is the current plan, and who is also actually has a doctorate and is working on a second doctorate. Very amazing person who is also in the text message course for this piece. Composer in their own right as well too. So I always say that we really know the best people. So stay tuned for that. And I invite you to check out Steven's work, serpamusic.com, SJ Sérpa on Instagram, and Steven Sérpa on Twitter. And of course, you can find us at operaqueens.ca and on social media at Opera Queens. And stay tuned because we have performed the work in Montreal and have a video of that. And we also have the film production of These Wings, which we're currently working on, which will be released. So I'm also really looking forward to seeing how that will turn out. So stay tuned for that, and really hoping that we will have another way in the future to collaborate with Steven, both with These Wings or in other ways. So stay tuned to us, stay tuned to Steven, and keep creating and keep that passion of creation alive. As you see in the pandemic, it's been difficult for the performing communities, but there's still new work being written and created and being performed, and we're all finding ways to be innovative. So keep that flame and passion alive for creation wherever you are in whatever way that you choose. So thank you so much, Steven, and we're going to wrap up our interview portion, and we're going to stop the recording and speak to some of our wonderful people, including César, who we've spoken a lot about today. And thanks again, Steven, so much.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Yay! And goodbye to all of you in the future, too. And see you next time, we hope.